tell you what's about to happen, and where basically I get the basics done, I hope. And then afterwards, we'll see if that has actually materialized. And we'll go through this first, what a typical week will look like. And I have a question about that, because we can change the typical week if you want. Then what you need to do to pass the course. That's all relatively short, because it's all on Canvas as well. I'll show you what is normally on Canvas every week. I'll talk a little bit about our data and about the statistical vehicle that we want to use, and that is a program that's called Stata. Then, the good news is I don't think I'll need twice 45 minutes, so one longer session should be good enough for today. We'll have more than enough of these sessions, so I think for today that will be enough. Then, one thing that I'd like to make clear as soon as possible is, as of the next lecture, the laptops should be closed for two reasons basically. One is that I think for you it's difficult to get rid of the distractions that are so close if you have your laptop in front of you. For now it's fine, just keep hiding behind it, no problem. The other thing is that for me, I don't like being the background noise to you checking your email, so I simply don't like that. But for now we're good to go. We'll do that next time. Then in a nutshell, the aim of the course is pretty simple. The aim is simply, I give you data and you should be able to do something with it that makes sense. So the standard would be a 10 score. The perfect score would be somebody asks me, do something with that data, I hand the data over to you, and then you do it. And then you should hopefully get the same kind of result that I would have delivered myself. If you do that, then you have a 10, and everything else is worse than that. And we'll see that, quite a few of these things by and of itself are relatively simple to do, but there are quite a lot. So in the beginning you get the feeling that, easy, 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 and then if you don't keep up, at some point I will keep talking, keep adding new things to do, and you will have forgotten the first 5. So the thing to do is just to keep up every week, and then you should actually be good to go. Okay, before we go there, 2 examples of data analysis that should be familiar to you. The first one is the Netflix data. We had the Netflix prize a while ago, and I think, most of you are too young to remember that Netflix actually started as more or less a standard DVD rental company. First of all, a DVD, that's something that's a circular disc that you put somewhere in a machine that you now no longer can get. But these things you used to have actually offline stores where you go there and you rent a DVD box. Netflix didn't do that. There were no stores. You could simply go online, you could click and say, I want this one, and it would be sent to your door. So there were no physical stores. When you're done, you got an envelope, you put the thing in the envelope, you send it back to Netflix, and they send you the next one on your list. So they started out trying to make sure that they are really, really good at predicting, at suggesting to you what your next movie might be, because, well, that's how they lived. As long as you keep asking for new DVDs, you get them, and you can, and you are willingly paying for every month of payment. Okay, so I started with that quite soon. There was all based on these kind of things, just a mailbox and that's it. And now, of course, everything is online and everybody knows Netflix. And what they did a while ago is they came up with what was called the Netflix prize. And they said, well, we make a living from coming up with decent suggestions for people what their next movie might be. And we are pretty good at that. And we give you, I think, what was it, a couple of gigabytes of data to work with. That is what you know about people who have rented for a longer while, for a shorter while, and you know which movies they rented and which they liked. And the aim for you is, okay, for each and every movie in the database and for each and every person in the database, you need to come up with an estimate of how good you think this person considers this movie. And I said we have quite a decent algorithm already. If you are, I think, 10% better, I won't go into the metric right now, but 10% better than we are, excellent, then you win $1 million. Or actually the rule was, as soon as you are 10% better, then the contest will continue for another month. If nobody else beats you, then you get the $1 million. And they did it. And then in the first, I think, 8 weeks or so, the first 7% out of the 10% was already reached. So people were saying, okay, this is taking just a couple of days and then we're done. And then the million is out and that's it. And it turned out not to be so easy. So the first 7% was easy and then really slowly crawled towards the 10. And in the end, somebody won. I have to, don't think I have the, here? No. Yeah, this is a typical leaderboard. You can see, you don't see that from a distance, but here it says Belt Course Pragmatic Chaos. This was a team consisting of, I don't know, 15 or 20 scientists from IBM and a couple of other companies who were working around the clock trying to beat that 10%, and in the end they did, and they won. And that leaderboard was open to everybody, so you could see how well you are doing. And in the end they won the whole thing, but it did turn out to be quite difficult to be so good. If you look at the statistics behind it, the idea was simply, well, you have inputs from people, for instance. What kind of person is this, boy or girl, young or old? When do they rent their movies? What do they rent? Which day of the week is it? And you get an output, and the output is, well, on Netflix, most of the time it's sort of like a 5-star rating, where you can make steps of half stars, and that number that you had to predict. So the idea is I have a lot of inputs over there, a lot of different kinds of inputs as well, and the thing to do is, okay, predict the output, and the output would be, for this movie and this person, what would the assessment be? Okay, so we had, 1 million to give away, 2 gigabytes of data to work. By that time, there was a lot. Now 2 gigabytes of data is already not exceptional anymore. That will easily fit your laptop. And back then it was still relatively complicated. Nowadays you have all kinds of ways to make sure that you 2,000 times that is doable, not on your laptop anymore, but you can do it in a distributed way. It's all relatively easily done. We will do none of that, by the way. All our examples are small packaged data sets. What you see here is lots and lots of predictor variables, and we're trying to predict something in the end that says something about the extent to which you like a movie. Okay, we can't compete anymore, it's done. There was a Netflix prize too. There was something interesting in the results. So they published all the results, and the top 100 or so, they looked at that. So the top 100 gave predictions for each and every movie in the database. And what you could do is, let's take the bottom 10 from the top 100, and they gave predictions for each and every movie. And what we could do is we simply average out the predictions from the bottom 10 and make that a new contestant, a new model. And it turned out to be that if you average out the bottom 10, you get a new model that would typically be ranked, let's say, 10th or 11th or so. So even though you might think, well, bottom 100 is not so great, 90 through 100, if you average those out, you get something that's better. And nobody, as to this day, nobody knows really why this is working. If you combine, let's say, relatively, well, stupid is not the word because top 100 is still very good, together with each other, you get something that's better. And Netflix Prize 2 was exactly about this, trying to understand why this happened. But then at some point somebody complained about their privacy being out the window, given that they knew that they were there in the data set and so on, and they won, and then Netflix stopped the whole thing, and it stopped short just there. So that Netflix Prize 2 never occurred. And actually the winners who came up with a very, very good prediction model had a prediction model that was so complicated, I think the average of 120 models themselves, that it was simply too complicated to implement this at Netflix. So they chose something that was way easier in the end. But they did get quite a bit of PR from it. And the new contest, alas, didn't work out. These kind of things are online nowadays in different versions. Kaggle is relatively well known. Typically, given that it is such a good idea to average out lots of predictions, what companies could do is, okay, here we have a forecast for tourism, and what we want is 100 teams who work on it and come up with predictions for whatever it is that we have in terms of data. And then what we do, we might even average those out, and we give a prize, not even so high, let's say $10,000 or so to the winner, and that's pretty much it. And then we have 100 teams who have worked for us. Actually worked quite well. And just to get you going about this whole idea, we've tried this before. It's now a couple of years ago, and we ranked 19th out of 51, competing with all kinds of universities in data mining and computer science and who knows what. And the only thing that we had going for us was sweat and giving it a try. I had to add here that it's sort of, because we actually didn't rank 19th, but this was because the student who had to upload our solutions was actually 20 minutes late. So we didn't deliver in the end. But had we delivered, we would have been 19th out of 51. Not so bad. Okay, so that's Netflix, 2 gigabytes of data, lots of predictors to work with, trying to predict something about the attractiveness of a movie. This is an experiment that you, in all likelihood, remember from the introductory class in psychology. Here you have a smartphone with which you can nowadays measure your heart rate. And we have 3 conditions here. First, a control condition, measure your heart rate with the smartphone. That's in this column over there, control. Then relive a memory where you were angry, and then while you do it, measure your heart rate again. You will see the second column over there. And a third condition was, okay, now relive a memory where you were happy, and again, measure the heart rate. And the only thing that we want to know here is, okay, is this average number here in this anger column higher than the control? Is that happy column number on average higher than the control? And perhaps also is the anger column higher or lower than the happy column? But these are relatively simple comparisons, only 2 variables at a time. That's pretty much it. 2 columns in the data, not 2 gigabyte, but just a handful of numbers, and that's pretty much it. And we'll do these kind of things as well. Okay, so that's the first take-home message. There are 2 totally different things you can do with data, and they really are different. First is prediction. As in the Netflix case, you could argue there, I don't care so much which of these predictors actually work, as long as they do. The only thing that I want if I am Netflix is that, I send you my suggestion and you say, yeah, I like it. And if I don't really understand how I do this with my own model, then it doesn't matter, as long as it works. If I want to predict the stock market for tomorrow and I have a model that I do not understand, but it works, excellent. Understanding is different. There you could argue, well, in this case here, the only thing I want to know is there a difference between these 2? There is no suggestion here that, as soon as I know in which condition you are, I can predict your heart rate. That's not the point. The point is not that I want to predict yours and say, you now have 76. The only thing I want to know is there a difference between these 2 conditions. And most of the time we do these kind of things and do not care so much about how well it is predicting. But if you are interested in these kind of things, we'll see down the line that it's different from actual prediction models. Okay, then, course 7. Let's see. We have a book. There are different versions. We use the latest one. I think that's the 4th or even the 5th. Don't know exactly, but it doesn't make so much of a difference actually, because they are largely the same. And we go through this chapter by chapter, and you'll see on Canvas which chapter we will be going through. The first 4 or even 5 chapters we will go through really fast because there's not much in there besides, okay, this is how you boot up Stata, this is what you can do with Stata, this is how you read in a data set. That's all pretty easy and way easier to do just by doing it than by actually reading the whole book cover to cover. Okay. Yeah, I don't have 4 and 5 online at this point because I think that the books are available. This is from last year when they weren't available in time. Then I put 4 and 5 online just to make sure that you could have it, but I don't have it now. If you find yourself without a book, then let me know and I can put these somewhere. Okay, there is obviously no video lecture here, but I am screencasting the whole thing, so I'm taping my screen. And when I'm done, I'll upload this to Canvas. So if you miss a lecture, then you can, see the laptop screen and hear my voice, which should be enough to follow if you missed it. Or when you get closer to the exam or want to simply hear it again, what the explanation was, then you can do it. This is it's a service, so every once in a while this might go wrong if something stops here or wants to update or who knows what. Or I click the wrong button, then it might be that there is no sound or no image or no nothing. Tough luck. If you want to be sure that you hear what there is to say, just be here. But most of the time, I think this will work. Okay, typical week would look like this. Wednesday, hours 7 and 8, I'll lecture. Fridays on hours 1 and 2, I'll lecture as well. And on hours 3 and 4, you have practice hours. There are a couple of assignments online, there are wikis online, I'll show those in a minute. And the wiki material is exactly the kind of material you can expect at the exam. So if you know how all these assignments work, and you can practice them here, yeah, I think here I'm here on Fridays as well. I'll be here as well. If you get stuck, I can help you out. And in principle, if you know how all these wikis work, then yeah, there's nothing complicated at the exam anymore. Okay, so 4 hours of lecturing, 2 hours of practicing, all of which are in principle, you know, they're not mandatory. If you don't want to be here, it's fine, but it's up to you. It goes for the practicing as well. If you want to practice at home or not at all, this is totally up to you. Okay, first exception, this Friday we start at 9:45, hour 2. There's not so much to do just yet in terms of practice, so now we can start this Friday on hour 2. I'll lecture on hour 2 and 3, and we practice on hour 4. Okay, not good enough. Okay, data. That's the stuff that we are going to use to run our analysis in. We are at version 14. And there are a couple of reasons why we use it besides the more standard SPSS option. I think you must have seen this also in the first methods course already. SPSS is a program that's a bit, yeah, let's say, better known, but there are a gazillion reasons why Stata is actually better. The only reason not to use Stata is that it is more expensive and a bit more difficult to get our hands on. But you know, we're trying to solve that every year, a little bit higgledy-piggledy. But I think in general, Stata is way easier, especially if what you need to do is run what's called do files. So you have files with syntax that you run on your data instead of running your commands interactively. I'll show you how that goes in a minute. And that's way easier in Stata than it is in most other software packages. Okay, Canvas, that's nothing new. I'll go through what it looks like. Okay. Let's take, okay, so the first thing to see is there's a long list of things that we are about to do. Separate modules where per module you see which of the chapters in the book are being treated. Let's see. Let's take this one. They normally have the same setup. Here you see first, and you'll see that each and every time reading guide and slides. So this tells you something about which chapter to read and which part of the separate chapters. I'll put the slides in there, and that's pretty much it. Second one is screencast, and then not my own screencast, but screencasts from other people. But there's a lot on the internet, other people trying to explain the same kinds of things. I went through quite a few of these, not all of them I find very inspiring, but some of them are really good, and the ones that I find really good I put there as well. That's not extra material, just another way to try to understand the same material. Annotated output, that's not a screencast, but that's simply a Stata run through data, explaining exactly line by line what's going on. Also quite convenient, especially in the beginning. Assignments, you'll only see these in the early chapters, are, you know, as it says, assignments that are actually found in the book. And more importantly, wikis, we'll keep seeing those across the weeks. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, so here we have first the data on heart rates that I got from Daniel from one of the earlier years. There are a couple of questions here, 3 questions in this case. By and of itself, the questions are not that complicated. Come up with the mean and the variance for a couple of variables in the data set. So if you would have the list, you could easily do this in Excel, but the whole point is that you have to get used to doing these kind of things in Stata. So this is one way to make sure that in the end you know how to use Stata. What you can do, as soon as you know how it works, is edit this page through this button over there. And what you do there is you type exactly the thing that you would type in a Stata do file. Now at some point, and these are actually relatively simple, You might think, well, I know the answer. You simply put it there, you think it's done. These are the answers and they are correct. If that is the case, send me a note through the forum. And as soon as somebody says, okay, I think this one's done, please check it, then I will. If it's correct, I will close the whole thing and everybody has the right answers. If it's not correct and needs still a lot of work, I might simply say, okay, no, this is not correct, think about this and that and try again. But the whole principle is, we have these wikis over there. The aim for you is to copy-paste the right answer in there. And as soon as one of you thinks it's done, then let me know, and I'll make sure that the whole thing is checked. So if, let's say once a week, there is a small group willing to do the actual legwork and make sure that the wikis are complete, I'll check them and everybody has all the answers. However, if that doesn't happen, I'm not going to supply the answers if nobody does something. Okay, so it's sort of a common misunderstanding that people tend to think, yeah, you know, if we wait long enough, there will be a point in time that he will do it. Okay, he won't. You have to do it. Let's see. Yeah, and then for each and every one of these modules we have a separate forum, so if you have particular questions about the wiki, for instance, or something else in the lecture that is about this topic, fine. Don't send me an email, but put it in the forum over there, and by all means, if you happen to know an answer to a question in the forum, then just type it there. That's the whole idea of having a forum. Okay. So, on Canvas, what do we need? Yeah, first you have to check that you're actually in there. That's usually okay. What we will do is we go through all these separate modules simply sequentially. So we start from the top and all the way to the bottom. And usually one of these modules per week, not always exactly, but that's a decent approximation, I think. There typically is more material available than you need. So the material that you need to know is in the chapters of the book and on the slides. And there is extra material there that is for you to help you understand the whole thing. But for instance, it might very well be that in screencasts from somebody else, there is material in there that I didn't cover. Then you do not have to know that either. Okay, this is what I said already. The wiki answers will not be supplied online by me, but you can ask me to check an answer if you feel it's complete. Yeah, one thing that we don't want with these wikis, and it happens quite often, there is an answer already there, and you think, not so sure if this is actually correct, but I'm also not so sure that my own answer is correct. So what I'll do is I'll just put a dashed line somewhere and then start my own answer beneath it. Okay, if a couple of people do that, then we have a big list of 4 different answers, and you know, that's going nowhere. So if you think that you have a better answer, get rid of the one that's there and put yours in there. Just be daring. The assignment will be answered by me, and use the discussion forums to ask questions. Yeah, and another thing is to double check your personal settings, especially that you are enrolled in all the forums and you get all the messages that you're supposed to get. Okay, then passing the course. The first part is obvious in the sense that it is all online. We have 2 intermittent tests. The intermittent tests are largely multiple choice, either multiple choice or perhaps short answer questions, but in any case, what we'll do is not use Stata at that point. So the only thing that you need to be able to do is use a laptop and your browser, that's it. No actual data analysis by you. The dates you can find online, it still takes quite a while. Then we have a final exam on laptop, and there you do need to do something with data. So you get a data set, and you get questions that go with the data set, and you have to solve these questions. Let's see, final grade is 0.3 times the intermittent tests, and 0.7 times the exam. You pass with a 5.5 or more, and the exam must be at least a 5.0. So that's the grading part, and there are a couple of mandatory things. First, there is a professional skills part involved here. This is way in the end, so already in the new calendar year, but nevertheless you have to do it. There are a couple of mandatory things to complete, so every once in a while there will be a quiz where I'll ask you to complete it, not necessarily for a grade, But for instance, what I could ask you is, this is a quiz with, let's say, 20 questions. Make sure that you can complete this quiz with at least 18 questions correct. And then the thing for you to do would be simply to go through the quiz until you have 18 correct. And that shouldn't take, if that takes 20 times, then something is wrong. Let's see, yeah, we also check, if you check all the parts of the Canvas site, this is done automatically. So we keep track of where you are going when you are going through the course here. If, let's say, half of the things that we have online there are simply not clicked by you, this would be a reason to do something about your grade in the downward direction. And the other mandatory thing is to fill out a survey, and we have, I think, about half of you who have completed this already. The other half, please make sure that you do. I have the link on another slide in a minute. Then the final exam will be on laptop, and it has to be a Windows laptop or a Mac running Windows natively through Bootcamp. You're not allowed to run Windows virtualized on a Mac. This is because we otherwise cannot easily check what you're doing during the exam, and that we simply need to do. Okay, still quite a while away, so at this point not much of a concern, but at least so that you know in the end you need a Windows laptop on the exam. Okay, then, yeah, as you will find out, it's relatively easy to slack off, especially as soon as you start to feel that, the first 1 or 2 lectures it was relatively easy to follow, but then I was dozing off and I didn't return, so to speak. Yeah, this is actually the most complicated part of the course. Getting yourself to actually do it. If you do, fine, it shouldn't be that complicated. If you don't, then, a week before the exam I'll give it my best, and then that's usually how I do it. That normally works. Give it a try and I'll see you at the resit. That's basically how it works. Yeah, I checked actually, because given that we have all this on Canvas and also on OnCourse, what we had before, the ones who do this really slowly in the beginning and then start in, let's say, the last 2 weeks, if you look at the average grades for the final exam, that is a 3.1, and the ones who regularly do something every week, what they get on average at the exam is a 6.9. So, twice the grade. What else do you want? Okay, then do the math. I think for the last 5 years, the course scores more or less on par with the ECTS that you get for it, with the study points that you get. So people tend to say, yeah, this is about what I, in the end, invested in terms of time. If you do the math here, then you'll see that you need quite a bit of hours in terms of preparation or doing your actual assignments, otherwise you're below par. So if you just show up at the lectures and that's it, and you start to feel, how is it possible that I'm not keeping track here? Well, you simply invest not enough hours. That's the only reason there is. Okay, all the warnings set aside. This is a valuable skill, and it's getting more and more valuable. We have data science masters here and in Den Bosch and in Tilburg. Before we started that, we asked companies that are near these 3 cities if we would have people who can do something with data. We would deliver people who can do something with data. How many of them would you be willing to give a job? And then they came up with huge numbers, way more than we could deliver. So in the end, if we added all the numbers, we came up with 2,000 or 3,000 that would be able to find a place somewhere. So if you know how to do this, this is a valuable skill, and it's a fun thing to do. If you're inspired by the money, I went online and checked, what does it cost? Okay, can you do my data analysis? You can ask $100 per hour for the kinds of analyses that we are about to learn. Okay, so that I'm doing this for free is, in a way, ridiculous. Or, if you're motivated by other matters, this is a cool skill. You used to be a total nerd, you know something about numbers, not anymore. couple of examples that we can get from doing the math. And the math, really the same kind of things that we will do here with data. This is from the book called Soccernomics, where they simply had a lot of data about soccer, football. And one thing that you see is if we try to predict who is going to win from two teams, one way to go about it would be you simply check from the 11 players who are in the field, you add their salaries, and that gives you a number. And you do that for the other team as well. And based on that, you simply check how likely is it that the one with the higher salary is going to win. And that is a really, really good model with, well, R squared, we will talk about what that is later, of 0.92, where the maximum actually is 1, so this is pretty good. So that would be a very good prediction. And this is, by the way, also why in the Dutch Toto, where you have to predict different soccer games, that they typically do not choose these kinds of games to compare. Then you typically have to predict FC Den Bosch against Veendam, where they both have basically no salary, so then it's not very predictive anymore. This is why the Toto will still work, otherwise it would be relatively easy. And actually it's way better than trying to predict based on the transfer signs. You could also look at not what they earn every week, but how much they were bought for, and then add that up. That doesn't predict very well. You can also see a couple of other things. For instance, that if you do the math here, that certain nationalities, the book is already a couple of years old, typically the Dutch are actually overvalued. So for some reason or another, Dutch are bought for large sums of money, relatively speaking. I think it's a while ago. I doubt that many of the players nowadays are going to be sold for a lot, but anyhow. What you also see is that older players are overvalued. So as soon as they become really, really good, then they are being sold for huge amounts, and the amounts are actually higher than they are actually worth. And typically overvalued are center forwards, so the ones who are scoring the goals, and the goalkeepers are typically undervalued. Goalkeepers, the good goalkeepers should actually be worth more than they are. Anyhow, all based on the same kind of things that we're about to do. So this is good to know that something of value can come from this. And in fact, you could do these kind of things way better than they can do it now at quite a few of these soccer teams. This is the other well-known example. This is the same thing, but then in baseball. If you've seen the movie Moneyball, already from a couple of years ago, this depicts exactly what happened for, I forgot what the team was, but where, not Brad Pitt, but Brad played the guy in the movie. A very poor team with not a lot of budget, and he came up with the idea, well, let's go by the numbers to try and think about what are the next players that we are going to buy. And he did very well, and nowadays everybody is doing this. Okay, then, last bits to explain what will be going on. First of all, this you might recognize as what a standard paper where you have data will look like. What's the problem? What do we think is the answer? How are we going to figure out if that's actually true? We are collecting some data here, and we analyze our results, and we write up our conclusions. Standard. The stuff in red you did in the first methods course. So an experiment, a survey, a case study, perhaps something else. And collecting data, we also did a little bit of that. We will talk a little bit here about sampling. How many cases do we need actually, given that we know what it is that we're going to measure, and how are we going to analyze the results. So we are sort of in the back end of a typical paper. And all these things have to do with, well, in the beginning, how two different variables relate to each other. In the end, we'll have more as well, but we start with two. So questions could be, if you have data that looks like this, this is a person, the name, this is age, female or not, grade for something, and nationality. Do females score higher than men? Are females older than men in this data set? Do older people get higher grades? All these kind of things that you can easily see in the data if you know what you need to do. Okay, everything can be understood as compare one variable, x, with another one, y. This I'll skip. This is old news, but important nevertheless, which is why I repeat it here. A couple kinds of variables that we are going to consider here, and this is important because it determines to a large extent, no, completely actually, which kind of analysis that you need. So you have to be able to discern what a variable is, categorical, different kinds of categories that are not related themselves. So I could ask you, how did you arrive at the university this morning? On foot, by bike, by car, by motorcycle, by public transport. 5 different categories, and in the data they will have a number. The first one 1, the second one 2, 3, 4, and 5. But I could have easily interchanged the numbers because the numbers themselves mean nothing. It's just to make sure that we have a number that we know that 1 is, let's say, on foot, but there is no order in there. It's called categorical or nominal. And when you have only 2 categories, we will often call this a dummy variable, 0, 1, or a binary variable, 0, 1. And that could be anything, for instance, gender, or age is over 40, or whatever. And then I'll look at the third one here, that's interval scale. There you have something where there is an order in there, and the intervals between different values are evenly spaced. So age is a typical example. The difference between 17 and 18 is really the same as the difference between 31 and 32. And that you need. If you do not have that, then it's not an interval scale variable. Actually, for it really to be interval, it should have, in principle, no restrictions. So age is not even a good example because age stops at 0 on the one hand, and for humans also at, let's say, 130 on the other. So even there, it's not really interval, but let's say close enough. Or the number of movies that you've rented before at Netflix, the 0 is the minimum, so officially this is not interval, and over 1 million also will not happen, so also restricted. So every once in a while we do not bother too much with that exactly, but you need to know, let's say, if it's interval enough, and something in between there is it's called ordinal, and we will not use that very often. If you have something like this, what is that? How often do you rate a movie? Never, sometimes, often, always. There is an order in there, but the difference between never and sometimes need not be equally large as the difference between often and always. Okay. That will need, if we know that, we can come up with the appropriate analysis here. Okay, so let's use a couple here. Well, the first one is obvious. If we look at, let's say, length and weight, people who are taller, on average, weigh more. Okay. Length is interval scaled, weight is also interval scaled, so here we would need what's called correlation. If you are female, you are more sensitive to alcohol. This is not obvious just yet how we want to measure this. Female is obvious how to measure this, and it's a binary variable. Well, sort of. Sensitive to alcohol, this is not so obvious. You could simply ask, are you sensitive to alcohol? And you have yes, no, and we have 2 binary variables. Or you could make it experimental. You keep on drinking, and we keep feeding you beer until you topple over, and this is your measurement for how sensitive you are. Then it would be an interval scale variable. And in fact, let's see, the effect is as it is mentioned here. So females, on average, are more sensitive to alcohol. It's just how it is. The other ones are not. So listening to Mozart doesn't give you a higher score on an IQ test, not really. Remembering a scenario where you were angry, that does give you a faster heartbeat, that is true. And if you're younger, you'll like action movies better. I think that might also be true. But I don't really know. Then these names, I'll try to use only Y or target variable, but they're all the same. So the response variable, or the explanandum, if you want to show off your Latin, that's also used every once in a while. Or the dependent variable, all the same thing. And for independent, we have X variable or predictor or explanans, also Latin. Okay, normally what we want is X is causing Y. And very often when the data presents itself to us, the only thing that we have is X is related to Y, which is not the same. Okay, what are we up to? So, let's see, very briefly, 2 variables here, categorical by categorical. If you have that, for instance here, male or female, this is our own data, but then from a couple of years ago. And here I'm asking, to what extent do you think that you are below average or not? You could argue that below, very much below average, sort of below average, average, a little bit above average, and a lot above average, that is even interval, but, well, I don't really think so. So here you have two categorical variables, and what you need for that is called a chi-square test. So that's actually the first test that we're going to do. How is that working? It's called chi-square. Here's something else. Again, male-female, that's categorical. And now we're comparing the estimate of your future income. So would it be the case that males in general think that they are going to earn more than females? Well, you can see here, the thing we need for that is a t-test. So again, here you see that as soon as you know what the kind of variables are, that will give you a clear suggestion on what to do. And in this case, it's a t-test. That will be the second thing we'll go through. Then age, which is interval, and the estimate of future income is also interval. You want to see the ones who are older, are they thinking that they are going to earn more in the end? For that you need a correlation test. That's the third one we'll go through. One that we will have in the end is, there are quite a couple of questions in there. This is all too small for you to read, doesn't matter so much. But I ask you in 8 different ways, basically how happy you are. And what you want is from these 8 different ways to ask that one better measurement than the 8 ones separately. So it's slightly different, not really a test here, but and we have this way in the back, I think even in the new year already. And this is the one that will take by far the most time. This is called regression analysis or multiple regression. We have a big bunch of predictors of all kinds. So we have age, that's interval scale, we have gender, that's categorical, the average grade that you scored in high school, that's also interval, and some measure of happiness, it's also interval, and we use these 4 to try to predict your estimate of future income. So this is, let's say, in a really small nutshell, the Netflix approach. We have a big bunch of predictors, try to figure out, can we predict, in this case, the estimate of future income. And that's the only thing we do. So the weeks will pass, and one by one we'll go through all these tests. And every once in a while we'll take a little bit longer because we have assumptions. We can only do these tests if this and that assumption is actually fulfilled. So we have to know how to test that, and we have to know what to do if it doesn't work out. There are alternatives there, and we'll do all those. And one other thing that will be quite a big issue is that there are differences between what an experiment is and what a survey is in terms of your data. So if you have predictor variables of different kinds, then you need to be able to discern between experimental variables and survey variables. And I use this example over there. This is a Milgram's experiment where there is another person in the other room answering questions, famous experiment. The other one in the other room is actually a stooge and will give wrong answers, and the task of that person over there is to give some current up to very dangerous levels to the other person in the room. And well, the big thing there is people do this. Okay, so if there's somebody standing there that will say, okay, please continue with the experiment, then quite a few people will actually deliver these lethal shocks. But there are different ways to go about it. One would be, let's see, if everything that we can measure on this person, but that is not in our control. So I want to know if this is a guy or a girl, or I want to know how old are you, or I want to know how much coffee did you drink just before you came in. All things that I can measure, I can ask, but it's not under my control. Other things would be, well, that danger sticker there, I could have half of the people where I have the sticker, and the other half of the people that do not have the sticker. If I do this, in the end, I get a variable in my data that says sticker, no, for the first half, let's say, and yes, for the second half. I made that predictor variable, and then it's an experimental variable and has different kinds of characteristics, we will see later, than the other ones. So that's the big thing here. An experiment suggests that you have a variable that you created yourself. Subject is given a sweater to wear, so if you think that that makes any kinds of difference, then you flip a coin. If it's heads, you give the person a sweater, wear this, and if it's tails, you say nothing. And in the end, in your data, you get person got a sweater, yes or no. If you have a variable like that, that'll help. Or perhaps a little bit more obvious, what you could try to do is, let's say, make the lab person as official as possible. Give make sure that this is an older person, like me. Let them wear glasses and a white lab coat and only speak with a very low voice. Versus there is somebody there, a young girl in a short skirt. Well, that might help even, but anyhow, that could be another condition. And in any case, I made the condition, so in the end, I get a variable in my data, old guy, younger girl, or nobody there, perhaps, could be 3 categories, and then it's an experimental variable. Okay. Our standard run in the data, always the same, independent of the kind of test that you'll do. You get some data, and the first thing you do is you check it. One of the typical things that you have to get used to, especially if you have data from somebody else, as you will have each and every time here, is that you have to check your data for all kinds of weird things that might be in there. Never trust that everything is all right. So that's something that you need to do first. Then you determine what kind of analysis you need. That depends on the kinds of variables. Then you might think, oh, I need a couple of other variables besides the one that I have in my data. We'll go through what these are. You check your assumptions for whatever it is that you want to do in terms of analysis. You run your analysis, and then every once in a while there are a couple of assumptions that are sort of weird, but that can only be tested after the fact. So it would be obvious that, okay, are we allowed to do this? That you do that all before, but for some of these it's only possible to do it afterwards. We'll see that later as well. And then if you find out, no, this is not working or not good enough, then you go back to number 3 here, and try some more until you have an idea what's going on. So this setup we'll see more often for different kinds of tests, but in principle, all the same. Okay, so very briefly, Stata, let's say 5 minutes or so, and then we should be more or less to go. Here we have, let's get rid of this and that. I have 2 windows open here. This is the Stata window itself. If you want, and you don't, then you can do all the analysis here through the window interface. I want a summary and descriptive statistics, summary statistics. Okay, we don't want to go there. It's way easier simply to run the command right here in what's called a do file. So all these have an extension .do, and here I have an example file that I'll put online as well. First of all, important thing to realize here, everything that starts with a star, this is simply an ASCII file, is a comment. So nothing will happen as long as I keep adding stars here. Or something else that you can do is write 2 dashes there. That will also work. Okay, so all commenting, here I start with my first comment, my first command, that's clear. Get rid of everything that's in the data, that's in the window itself here. Now I read in my actual data. In this case, this is a standard Stata data set with some data about cars in it. Let's see, if I type exit over there, then it stops at this point. Now I have to make the font a bit smaller, otherwise you can't see it. So here that play button over there will run the whole thing top to bottom. Here you see the commands, clear, use that auto data set. Here you now see variables. And you could click over there or type edit over here. And then you see what the data actually looks like. And what you will always see is columns are variables. So here this is make of the car, price of the car, how many miles per gallon, repair records, some headroom number, not sure what exactly that is. The different rows are different cases in the data. The different columns are different characteristics of the things in your data. And we always do it like that. In principle, you could do it the other way around, but you don't. Then all kinds of things that you can do. Here the easy stuff. So let's say I'm going for a summary of the data, a summary of just a single variable, a summary of a single variable with some extras. Summary gives me an overview of all the variables that I have in my data, how many cases I have, what the mean is, the standard deviation, minimum, maximum. Here you see observation 0. That's a bit of a quirk from Stata because there are cases here. This is make, and we just saw that there are actually things in there. But here you see that this is a variable that consists of text only. This is also why it is in red. The other ones are in black. and the slightly other one here in blue that we'll never use. So there are cases here, but only because it's not numbered. Stata will say here that there is nothing there, which is a bit strange. Could have said 74 and it's all text, but they don't. Here you see that there are missings here, 69 cases only, instead of the 74 that you see everywhere else. A summary of the price variable only. You could argue, why would I ever want to do that, given that I can get them all? But if you have 200 variables and you only want to look at price, then it's way easier to ask for price itself. Or if you want some more details, here you see, let's see, the median, that's over there, and the mean and the standard deviation, variance, all kind of things that we'll go through later in some detail. Then a overview of the data. The variable rep78, which stands for repair record. Do not know exactly what it means, but we have cases with that are coded as a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, and a 5. And you see here how many. And if you add comma miss, this is also typical Stata. You get extra options with the command. Then you'll also see how many missings there are in the data for that variable. Might also be useful. This way of checking variables is tedious, but in fact the only way to make sure if there are weird cases in the data. So if, for instance, I look at, let's say, price, type that here as well. Now I have price here. The data set is really old. So these are cars from the 70s, I think, in the United States. The cheapest one is $3,300. The most expensive one was $16,000. I think for that time that might even have been reasonable. If I would have found here that there is another case in the data that says 220,000, I would double check if this is right. You know, there could be some weird car in there, just a single case, but I don't think that in all likelihood that will be. So just typing that tab command will show you if there are weird cases in your data. And if they are, you have to get rid of them. A couple of other things that I'd like to show you. You have if statements, only show me price if foreign is equal to 1. This is something else that I typically do myself. Instead of typing exit, if you type exit, Stata exits, fine. If you type X, this is not a command, it will also stop. You don't have to type exit. Okay, give me a summary of price if foreign is equal to 1. And the thing to get here is that you need the double equal sign in this case. All stuff that you can go through by yourself in the material that we find online. So there are quite a few more of these commands, all relatively straightforward, but you have to memorize them to know how they work. And the thing to get from this is, the whole idea would be, you get data, you create a do file, and then the only thing that you need to send to somebody else to make sure that they get the same results that you have is you send the do file. You don't need to send the data. In that file, in the do file, you do everything that is necessary with the data, and in the data itself, you do not mess with that at all, other than through the do file. And every once in a while, as I just did, you could type a little bit, tab price, let's have a look, fine, but in the end, all the stuff that you need, make sure you have that in the do file. There's a practice material and suggestions in the separate chapters, and you'll have to go through that yourself. Okay, so let's see, almost done. This is what a do file will look like from a distance. Try to invest some time in making that look neat. You do not have to be totally anal about this, as I am, but you know, it does help if it looks like this. You can easily, more easily find typos. It's just a good thing to do. And never ever use all kinds of commands interactively, especially not at your exam. If something goes wrong, and it might, then if you have a do file, the only thing to do is repair it, and you can rerun the whole thing again. Excellent. If you have made everything interactively, then you have to start completely over from the beginning and memorize what it is that you did before. It's a nuisance. Don't. Okay, let's see. So, dealing with data, canvas, we know that, Stata, X's and Y's, that's the only thing that we're going to do. When done with all this, you know your basic way around data, you know how to deal with data. And the thing to do as soon as possible would be to practice with the material in these first modules, so that, well, a couple of things will work. First, that you know how to boot up and start Stata, for that you need to install it, of course, first. And that you know the basic commands: give me the mean of this variable, give me an overview of this variable, and so on. All stuff that you can find in the first chapters of the book. The to-do list is, first, Canvas, make sure that it works for you. Update your personal info if need be and have a look around. There is quite a lot there for the first few chapters that you can do already. You can easily see how far you can come because the modules that we didn't treat just yet, they are there in terms of their title, but they are empty. So as soon as you find a module that has content, you can do it. Download and install Stata. If you have a Mac and nevertheless want to run Stata from your Mac, then approach me after class and we'll try to get that solved. And if you haven't done so yet, then make sure to actually complete the survey. And it might be a good idea to install, if you have your laptop here, in Stata now, if you haven't done it just yet, because now I'm still here. I can try to help you out. Okay, that's it. See you Friday.